There are moments when the entire world holds its breath. The 2026 Islamabad peace talks, that was one of them. These talks were supposed to be a massive breakthrough, but instead they completely fell apart, turning into a diplomatic disaster. So how on earth did a week that started with so much hope end with the threat of a global crisis? Well, let's break down the anatomy of this failure.
It all happened so fast. Just 1 week, 7 days. That's all it took for all that cautious optimism to just evaporate. Honestly, the speed of this collapse between the United States and Iran is pretty stunning. It's a huge reminder that the cracks in this foundation were there from the very beginning, just waiting for the slightest bit of pressure to shatter everything.
And the fallout, it was immediate. The second diplomacy was off the table, the US went ahead and announced a blockade of one of the most critical arteries of the global economy. Now, this isn't just some regional issue. This is a full-blown crisis with consequences for all of us. And this is where the real story begins. To really get why such a drastic move was made, we have to go back and really dig into what went wrong.
Okay, so the first, and you could argue the biggest reason for the collapse was a deadlock on the core issues. We're talking about fundamental disagreements where neither side was willing to budge an inch, which created an impossible situation right from the get-go. And right at the heart of it all were two demands that just couldn't coexist. On one side, you had the US absolutely insisting that Iran completely give up any ambitions for nuclear weapons. But on the other side, Iran saw its program as a matter of national pride and security, and flat out refused to accept what they saw as overly strict limits on uranium enrichment. There was just no middle ground to be found.
And this led to that classic problem that just plagued the whole thing. It was a diplomatic standoff, like a you go first, no, you go first kind of deal. Iran demanded relief from these crippling economic sanctions before they'd offer up any security concessions. But the US demanded those security guarantees before they'd even think about lifting sanctions. With both sides dug in like that, the negotiations were basically paralyzed from the start.
But here's the thing. What was happening inside that negotiating room? That was only half the story. There were these crucial outside factors that were putting immense pressure on the talks, and they were pretty much destroying any chance of success before it could even get started.
So Israel wasn't formally at the table, but believe me, its influence was felt everywhere. US leadership was in constant contact with Israel. Now, from Iran's point of view, this just made the American position even tougher. And when you add in Israel's ongoing military actions in the region, you have an environment where trust wasn't just low, it was actively being destroyed. Another huge point of conflict was control over this one critical spot on the map, the Strait of Hormuz. We're talking about the world's single most important oil choke point. A massive chunk of the world's oil supply has to pass through this one narrow waterway every single day. And look, this fight wasn't just about where to park your warships. This was a battle for geopolitical and economic power. If you control the strait, you control shipping lanes, you control security, and you control the flow of oil that basically powers the global economy. Any disruption here doesn't just stay in the region, it sends shockwaves to gas pumps all around the world. Now, underneath all these specific arguments, the nuclear program, the sanctions, the regional politics, there was a much deeper, much more corrosive problem, a complete and total lack of trust. This number, it says it all. 0. That's the amount of trust that was in that room. You've got decades of hostility, going all the way back to 1979, and including all the recent conflicts. It meant that any potential deal was being built on a foundation of pure suspicion. And when that's your starting point, even the smallest concession feels like a massive risk. Distrust deficit, well, it quickly spiraled into a public blame game. Both sides started using the media to paint the other as the bad guy, the only reason peace wasn't happening. So you had Iran accusing the US of not negotiating in good faith, while the US was out there saying Iran was just refusing to accept any reasonable terms. It became less of a negotiation and more of a war of words. And all of this drove both sides to what experts call maximalist positions. Basically, they each walked in with an all-or-nothing wish list. They wanted everything and were offering very little. The US demand was simple: no nuclear capability for Iran, period. Iran's demand? Full sovereignty plus a complete end to sanctions. When you start at polar opposites like that, there's just no room to meet in the middle. So when you put all these factors together, the collapse was almost inevitable, wasn't it? Let's just quickly recap the perfect storm of issues that really led to this failure. So what we're really seeing is a cascade of failure. You have that fundamental deadlock over the nuclear issue, which was made even worse by that chicken and egg problem of sanctions.
Then you throw in the external pressure from Israel and the high-stakes battle for control over oil routes, and you've got a recipe for disaster. But the fatal flaw, the one thing that made any compromise truly impossible, was that deep, historical mistrust that poisoned everything from the very start.
Which brings us right back to where we started. The failure of these talks led directly to a military blockade and the threat of retaliation. And this leaves us with a deeply unsettling question, one that's echoing through halls of power and across the world's markets. When diplomacy